Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be doing an unhaul, a DNFs, and a library saves. And I'm going to go about this a little bit differently than how I typically do, as within the library saves portion, I think if you've watched, you already have an idea, but if you don't, what I like to do is hype up the library by giving you a list of everything I was able to access through it, whether they be physical copies, audiobook copies, or both. Technically, a lot of these are likely available as ebooks as well. I just tend to not read things digitally, but regardless, I like hyping the library up. I like showcasing just how much accessibility there is to the library. However, this time around, I also wanted to attach a dollar figure and break down how much money I am saving as a result of the library. On top of that, within the DNFs portion of this video, so typically what I do is I let you know books that I have DNF within a quarter or roughly a quarter. And this time around, I'm happy to say, I suppose, that I haven't actually DNF'd anything, but I wanted to have a conversation about, I don't want to paint too broadly, but I'm not saying I wish I had DNF'd a lot of books by any means, but I also feel like there are a lot of books I finish, and then I'm just like, well, that was a book. I could have DNF'd them. I don't know that it would have made all that much of a difference. Really, what I'm saying is I am finding that there aren't that many books that I have picked up this year that I really, really love. And I'm curious if a lot of you are in a same position, if you're in the same boat or not. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and start the video here with this portion because we're already in it, and then I'll have timestamps in case you'd like to skip ahead to the unhaul or the library saves portion. But getting into the DNFs and being able to flesh this out a little bit more. I am not by any means trying to imply that fantasy is not as good as it used to be, or that fantasy romance is taking over and thus we don't have any of the great stuff anymore, because I think there's room for there to be new works within their own genre and for fantasy to still shine through. I do find on occasion that it feels as though people think that fantasy romance has somehow taken over where we don't have fantasy anymore. And I don't agree with that sentiment. I understand where people are coming from as far as popularity, where they feel like the only things getting hyped up are fantasy romance books. But I don't think that suddenly we are finding that publishing would have dedicated all of this over here to fantasy, and then fantasy romance came around, and now almost 90% of all of this is over here. I don't think it's anything like that, but I do find that marketing is in this weird place where, and I can be kind of critical of how things are marketed and how publishing goes about mentioning books, you could say, to potential readers, but I am, I guess, somewhat sympathetic because marketing's in a strange place where it doesn't seem like it knows sometimes with certain books that slightly straddle the line between fantasy romance and fantasy. It doesn't seem as though they know exactly where they're supposed to go. And I noted this when the Goodreads Choice Awards happened, when they actually dedicated an entire category to fantasy romance, that some of the books I even thought, really, that was fantasy romance? I feel like there's a romantic subplot, but I don't know if I would count it. And I think that the reverse happens sometimes. I've yet to read it, but evidently Five Broken Blades, which is a book that I would see all the time at Target, of all places, which Target has books. I just mean, I was always like, that book is always here, and it's always right on the edge of an aisle. And it's always at the front, too, by where you go to pay. But anywho, so that book is apparently fantasy romance. Nowhere in the synopsis does it indicate, nor does the cover indicate that that book is going to be fantasy romance. And there's nothing wrong with things being fantasy romance. There's nothing wrong with things being fantasy. I'm glad that both genres exist for readers who are looking for both. And where I'm incorporating marketing into all of this is I do feel like sometimes it feels deceitful in how they go about marketing things, and then other times it just feels like they don't know how to market something, and they're trying to figure out who's the target audience, and they just don't know because certain books, it's hard to determine where they're going to fall, and you want to ensure, if it is right on that line, that you don't end up disappointing people on both ends, because that can happen where the fantasy romance readers are like, there's not enough romance, and then the fantasy readers are like, there's too much romance, and then the book can kind of flop where maybe in the past it wouldn't have had any expectations placed on it based off of where it was within these genres. It would have just been considered fantasy, and some people would have picked it up and been like, wow, this is a great romantic subplot. Subplot? Of course it has some plot. Subplot. Anyway, where I'm going with all of this is just to say that I am finding some works I pick up to not be what I was expecting, which is fine to some degree. I want to hold myself accountable. I do try not to look too much into books at a time. I look at the synopsis when I do anticipated releases videos. Some of them are pretty upfront when something is one thing or the other. Sometimes it's less known. But either way, certainly I could probably wait for other people to do reviews, watch their reviews, or read reviews, and then give things a try. But I also find, for integrity purposes, because I make money off of the fact that I make videos, that I don't want to inadvertently take other people's thoughts. It's almost like intellectual plagiarism. That just feels very unfair to other individuals who are working really hard to have their own thoughts and opinions expressed. So as a result, though, of having that sort of principle in how I go about reviewing things, it does mean that I try to avoid seeing too much ahead of time, except for what has been marketed. And every now and then it does feel, though, as if I'm picking up a different book than what I was told it would be. That's one hypothesis. I don't know if that is the leading factor. I don't even think it is. I'm just also feeling like we have had a wonderful emerging subgenre that is cozy fantasy, and I really like cozy fantasy. When it's done well, it's great. Like The Spell Shop, for example, I thought was darling, and I, of course, thought it had Sarah Beth Durst's signature wonderful world building within it. So I thought that one, if anything, exceeded my expectations, but I already had high expectations because I think she writes really well anyway. But we have a lot of cozy fantasy, and we have a lot of fantasy romance. And these are feel-good stories, which is great. I like feel-good stories. Feel-good stories, I do not want to try and imply, don't have additional depth, because a lot of times within these stories, you're actually really, you're getting into the meat of why a person is the way they are, and how they're healing through something, or how they're changing through things, how their worldview is shifting. You a lot of times are exploring that within these stories, and especially in fantasy romance, you're often exploring the trauma a character has gone through. So I don't want to try to imply that feel-good stories like falling in love or having some kind of cute found family within a cozy fantasy story is somehow beneath something that's more cynical or anything like that. However, what I want to add to this is just that in having a lot of these feel-good stories, I find almost always that my favorite works are the ones that have this full range, where you have triumphant moments, you have devastating moments, you have the little quiet moments in between, you have a little bit of everything. I don't know why, I just don't feel like I'm finding that many books that have that this year. And it might not just be this year, maybe it's just that I'm experiencing fantasy fatigue. Maybe, I mean, I love fantasy. I don't feel like I don't want to read it, but maybe it's just that I read it so often that things are starting to feel tired a little, and it's not the book's fault. It's just that I consume so much fantasy. I'm not sure. This is why I just wanted to have a chat. It's not necessarily these really profound observations or anything like that. It's just kind of wondering aloud and being curious as to whether or not some of you feel you're experiencing this as well. I do think this might be slightly related to the conversation I've seen pop up here and there about, is epic fantasy dying? Because I don't think it's just epic fantasy. I think it's a certain kind of fantasy that a lot of us love and crave, that is also oftentimes very time consuming, because usually it's a series, usually it's a story that you have to give a lot of time to develop and build, and because it's a part of a series, you have to wait years and years and years before it's done or before new installments are out. But maybe it is something to do with that, and I would be curious to do a conversation like that with all of you at some point, maybe in the style of how I do the From Readers series. So I don't know, if I decide to do that, then be on the lookout, I suppose, for a community tab post entailing more. I did kind of jokingly say at one point, or maybe a couple of times this year, and now I'm wondering if maybe this is actually part of the problem. I very, very, very rarely have anything break into my all-time favorites. Every now and then there will be something that's a standout within a certain subgenre, but otherwise, when it comes to my all-time favorite series, it's very rare that something breaks into it. It's like once, maybe every few years. And I had that happen this year, which is always wonderful, and I jokingly was saying, I wonder if in finding this series that I love so much, if now everything else is going to pale in comparison. And I even went as far as to say I felt bad for the books that I was picking up after that series, which happens to be Age of Madness. But I was saying I felt bad for the books that I picked up after, because nothing was going to compare. And now I'm wondering, I'm like, oh, is that actually all it comes down to? Is it just that I loved Age of Madness so much that I'm like, why aren't more things like this? I don't know, not even like this. I'm not even saying I want more that's Abercrombie-like, but I just want more things that I love that much. Maybe I want more things that are Abercrombie-esque. Maybe that's part of it too. I don't know what it is, but I'm very curious if some of you have been feeling something similar. I have also not put up favorites this last quarter because I just really didn't find I had any. So typically at the end of every quarter, I go through everything I've read and I try to highlight 5 new fantasy works that I really adored, and then 5 works that were not new fantasy but backlist that I really adored, and I make those videos highlighting those. But this time around, this last quarter, I was like, oh, I don't know. I would be picking the ones that I thought were the best of what I read, but I don't even know that I can say I loved a lot of them. So, and I didn't do it. And that's the reason why. I'm sure none of you are like, we're due for another. Why hasn't she posted it? Would I feel differently if I just DNF more often? I don't know. I'm not a completionist. I'm not somebody that feels the need to finish everything, even if I'm really lukewarm on it, especially not series. If I'm like, about a series, I'm like, I'm not going to read 7 to 10 books or 3 to 5 books in something that I feel about when I could fall in love with something else. So I think I have a healthy level of DNFing, but maybe I don't. Maybe I need to DNF more. I'm just curious. Are you in this boat? Do you feel similarly to any degree? Are you having a great reading year? Because if so, I'm really happy for you. And are there any things that you just want to add to the conversation? Do I just need to find more things like Abercrombie? Is that all it is? I don't know. Anyway, all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the Unhaul and library saves. This will go pretty quick. I only have a few things to unhaul. So 2 of them would be Jennifer Saint books. I am unhauling these because I own a couple of really beautiful editions. I believe they're the Waterstones exclusive editions, or at the very least they're UK editions. And they're gorgeous. I like these books. I don't love them enough where I feel like I have to have every edition of them. And I just don't think these are quite as beautiful as those others. Also, this is really shallow, but this is the most orange book. And on the shelf, I'm always just like, it just stands out. I don't know, it irritates my eyes. Not actually, they're fine, but I don't know what it is. That orange, I mean, it looks good on the cover of that book, but on the shelf, I'm always like, if I have a little plant, because it's not usually on these shelves, I have other shelves, but if it's on another shelf and there's a little plant, I always kind of put the plant right there, because I'm like, oh, that orange. But anyway, that made the process of unhauling easier. But again, it more so comes down to the fact that I already have those other editions. When the Moon Hatched, I didn't care for this book basically at all. It was very long. Maybe this is one of the ones I could have DNF'd, but I really pushed through because I liked aspects of the premise and the world and where we started, and then those things were it just I didn't care for this book. I think that we'll just leave it at that. I have a lot of tabs, so I'm considering maybe at some point doing a review before officially unhauling this. But I'm also like, oh man, I don't know. it would just kind of be me being like, oh, let me just show you another excerpt of dialogue that I thought was ridiculous. And also look at this scene where all of a sudden this big world building thing was revealed that's never been alluded to or foreshadowed, but apparently it's a known thing. Oh, look at here, that happens again. Oh, look, now we're talking about how big the guy is. Did you know he's tall? He's really tall. Did you know he's tall? He's the biggest guy she's ever seen. Oh no, he's the biggest male she's ever seen. He's a massive male. He's the biggest. Like, he's such a big male. Oh my gosh. It'd be a lot of that. It'd just be a lot of me being exasperated all over again. And I don't know if that's worth making a video for, but at some point I will be taking that in. And then the last thing that I'm taking, the Unhaul portion, like I said, is relatively short. It is short. It's 4 books. That time I got drunk and saved a demon. I picked this up for a vlog that I am doing. Actually, both of these 2 books I picked up for that vlog, where I'm going through a bunch of fantasy romance books, and some of them were ones that you suggested, either because you thought I would like them, or because you wanted to know my thoughts, or you just wanted to know about them, or because you thought I would hate them and you wanted to troll me. I don't know where these 2 fell, but they were recommended in the recommendations. I hope they weren't ones that you thought I would love, because I didn't. This one was funny, certainly, and it was really self-aware. I talked a little bit more about it in a recent New Fantasy Releases wrap-up. I will give it its humor, because it certainly was present, and it was very on the nose. In fact, what I was just joking about with the When the Moon Hatched being a book that has a guy that's massive, this one is, it makes fun of that too, which I thought was pretty funny. But it's just from one place to the next. Let's have pining and tension, and then let's make out, and then let me be possessive of you, and then let me like that, and then let me do it with you now. And I kind of like when it's painful, and just like a lot of, you know, that, which that's for some people, wasn't necessarily for me. So that's my list of Unhaul books. Now jumping into the library saves. I'm going to go through this list really, really quickly. But first up, we have The Spell Shop. So I had pre-ordered the physical copy, but I was able to get the audiobook through the app Libby. The Bright Sword, I listened to the audiobook via the app Libby also, but what was nice is it was a skip-a-line copy, which I don't understand why those happen sometimes. I tried to understand. I'll look at the description and it'll be like, you got a special skip-a-line copy. And basically, you don't have to wait, even though there's 10 other people in line in front of you. For whatever reason, every now and then, you'll get a skip-a-line copy, and you just get to read it then. And I got that for the Bright Sword, and I was like, yay. So I got the audiobook through the library. I will say also, the physical copy was sent to me very kindly by the publisher. So the publisher actually saved me some money this time around as well. And then The Honey Witch was also an ARC that I had gotten, but I was able to listen to the audiobook as well because I do like immersion reading. So I was able to listen to the audiobook via, once again, the app Libby. This time around, all of them are, if they're an audiobook, it's from Libby. None of these are from Hoopla this time around. Race the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst, another Sarah Beth Durst book on this list. And I got the audiobook. Okay, this one actually was on Hoopla. Hoopla was not working one night, so I downloaded it on Libby and nobody was waiting, and I was able to finish the book. So anyway, I listened to the audiobook and I got the physical copy from the library, and at some point I actually would like to purchase this one. I just never see it at my local bookstores. So I'd prefer to buy things indie if possible, but this one I might have to buy elsewhere. A Crane Among Wolves. This, I just listened to the audiobook through the library. I actually already pre-ordered a physical copy because I have read and liked something else by this author, so I was fairly confident I would like this one, and I did enjoy it. Can't Spell Treason Without T. Very cute. Listen to the audiobook. Goddess of the River. I'd already pre-ordered a physical copy because I liked KKE by this author, and this one I had the physical copy, but the audiobook I got through the library. The Fireborn Blade, both physical copy and the audiobook I got from the library. Really liked this one, just like Race the Sands. I will at some point try to get it. I have seen this one at my local bookstores, but it's never on sale. So I'm waiting for someone to take it in, and then I can try to get it. I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons. This one, both physical and audiobook from the library. And then Spin of Fate. This one, I was sent an ARC, so I had the physical copy already. Once again, thank you to the publisher. and the audiobook I got through the library. So I actually really quick just want to highlight how much I saved via getting ARCs. I think sometimes it can, well, maybe some people do get tons and tons and tons of ARCs. I get some ARCs and I am always really appreciative because this is not exactly the highest paying profession, but I love it, and I am always really appreciative of when I'm able to get ARCs, as obviously in not making tons of money, if I were to try to go out and get these books and purchase them, especially when they're new, it would cost a lot. So they happened to save me this particular quarter, almost $75. It was $73.98. And how I calculated that is I looked at my indie bookstore, and one of them actually you can order books through them. And I went ahead and looked on their website to see how much they would charge. So for the Bright Sword, it was $35. For the Honey Witch, it was $18.99. And then for Spin of Fate, it was $19.99. So that's where I got the total of $73.98. But now the total from the library. So the way I calculated this is typically audiobook services, a lot of them cost $15 a month for one audiobook, which is not the worst deal in the world. It's not the best, but $15 for an audiobook that typically costs $20, $30, or sometimes even more dollars, I think that it makes sense. You know, $15 is also cheaper than what a lot of print copies are. But regardless, that is the dollar amount that I'm using here and how I'm calculating the total. So a lot of these I was able to get the audiobooks for, and a total of 10 of them were actually from the library, which means it was $150 just purely from the audiobooks themselves. And then for certain physical copies that I got with Race the Sands, this one was $19.99 on the bookstore's website. The Fireborn Blade was $20.99, which is pretty surprising. I know it's new, but it's also novella, so it's the fact that it's more than Race of Sands is a little surprising. But anyway, and then I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons was $26.99. So adding all of that up together was $217.97. So the library saved me a lot of money, almost $220. Thank you to the library for being wonderful and saving me a lot of money. And also just in general for providing so many great resources to the community where I live. It happens to be really, really hot. So the library is a cooling station for a lot of people trying to escape the heat. And I'm really grateful that they provide that because, man, if you have been in Arizona in the summer, just going outside to do anything is awful. So the idea that there are people hot and just looking for a place to cool down, I'm really glad that the library offers that on top of everything else that they do. But anyway, that's it for this kind of rambly DNFs, Unhaul, and library saves video. Let me know your thoughts on whatever within this that I talked about. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.